Everything you see in the outer world is a reflection of some truth within you. This isn't mystical talk. This is how consciousness works. Every quality, every behavior, every attitude you can perceive already exists in your inner map. Otherwise, you couldn't see it at all. But let's go deeper into this. Consciousness isn't like a blank screen that passively receives whatever is projected onto it. It's more like a sophisticated pattern recognition system that can only identify what it already contains. When you look at another person, you're not seeing them objectively. You're seeing them through the filter of your own psychological material. You're recognizing in them what you've already experienced, witnessed, or embodied in some form. This means that every person you've ever met has been, in a very real sense, meeting themselves. You've never actually seen another person. You've only seen your own projections, your own possibilities, your own hidden aspects, reflected back through their behavior and presence. Think about this for a moment. You walk into a room and immediately notice that one person who seems arrogant. Another person in the same room might not even register this quality. They might see someone confident or shy or intellectual, but you see arrogance. Why? Because somewhere in your consciousness, you have a template for arrogance. You know what it looks like, feels like, sounds like. And this knowing doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from direct, intimate experience. Now, here's where it gets interesting. That experience might not be conscious. You might think to yourself, but I'm not arrogant. I'm actually quite humble. And you might be right about your conscious persona. But consciousness is vast, and most of it operates below the surface of your everyday awareness. In that vast inner landscape, every human quality exists. Every possibility, every potential way of being. The ancient Greeks had a word for this. They called it the shadow. Not because it's dark or evil, but because it's the part of you that remains hidden from your conscious view. It's everything you've disowned, rejected, or simply never acknowledged about yourself. And here's the peculiar thing about shadows. They only become visible when light hits them at the right angle. Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon, and he discovered something fascinating. The more adamantly you deny a particular quality in yourself, the more likely you are to project it onto others. It's as if the psyche has this built-in mechanism that ensures nothing stays hidden forever. What you refuse to see in yourself will inevitably appear in your outer experience, reflected back through the people around you. Other people are that light. Every interaction is an opportunity for your shadow to reveal itself. But most of us miss this entirely because we're too busy looking outward, too convinced that what we're seeing belongs to them, not us. I remember watching a friend of mine become absolutely furious at a waiter who was being, in her words, passive-aggressive. She went on for 20 minutes about how much she despised this quality, how it was cowardly and manipulative. And as I listened, I began to notice something fascinating. Her entire complaint was delivered in a tone that could only be described as passive-aggressive. She wasn't directly confronting the waiter. She was venting her frustration to me, building a case against him, getting me to agree with her assessment. Classic passive-aggressive behavior, but she couldn't see it. The very quality she was condemning in him was playing out through her in that moment. This is how the mirror works. It doesn't show you what you want to see. It shows you what you need to see. And what you need to see is usually the last thing you want to acknowledge about yourself. There's a reason why certain behaviors trigger such strong emotional reactions in us. When you have a mild passing thought about someone's behavior, that's just observation. But when you feel that surge of anger, that knot in your stomach, that burning indignation, that's your unconscious material being activated. That's your psyche saying, pay attention. There's something here you need to understand about yourself. The intensity of your reaction is directly proportional to how much energy you've invested in keeping that particular quality hidden from yourself. The louder you protest, I would never do that, the more likely it is that you do exactly that, just in a way you haven't recognized yet. But here's what most people do with this mirror. They try to fix it. They try to change the reflection. They think if they can just get that arrogant person to be more humble, or that passive-aggressive person to be more direct, then they'll feel better. It's like being angry at your reflection in a bathroom mirror and trying to fix it by wiping the glass. And you can polish that mirror until it gleams, but if you're frowning, your reflection will still be frowning back at you. This bathroom mirror analogy reveals something profound about human behavior. When you don't like what you see in a real mirror, you instinctively know to change your expression or your posture, not to fix the mirror. But in the mirror of relationship, we consistently try to alter the reflection rather than examining what we're projecting. Imagine spending your entire life trying to make mirrors show you a different image without ever considering that you could simply change what you're bringing to the mirror. This is exactly what most people do in their relationships. They exhaust themselves trying to modify other people's behavior while remaining completely unconscious of their own inner state. The outer world is always reflecting the inner world, not in some magical, mystical way, but in the most practical, psychological way imaginable. You can only recognize what you already know. You can only be triggered by what already exists within you. You can only judge what you understand from the inside. Think about someone you deeply admire. What qualities do you see in them? Wisdom, perhaps, courage, authenticity, kindness. These qualities captivate you because they resonate with something in you. They're reflecting your own potential, your own capacity, your own deeper nature. You're not admiring something foreign. You're recognizing something familiar, something that calls to the same qualities within yourself. When you feel drawn to someone's confidence, it's because you have that same confidence waiting to be expressed. When you're inspired by someone's creativity, it's because your own creative potential is being stirred. When you respect someone's integrity, it's because you recognize that same moral compass within yourself, perhaps currently buried under layers of compromise and conditioning. The people you admire most are showing you who you're capable of becoming. They're like preview trailers for your own untapped potential. Now think about someone who irritates you profoundly. What is it about them that gets under your skin? Are they too loud, too quiet, too needy, too independent, too emotional, too rational? Whatever it is, I guarantee you that if you look honestly enough, you'll find that same tendency somewhere in your own psyche. This doesn't mean you express it the same way. You might be irritated by someone's neediness because you've gone to great lengths to become hyper-independent. But that hyper-independence is just neediness turned inside out. It's still the same core pattern, just playing out in the opposite direction. Or you might be bothered by someone's emotional volatility because you pride yourself on being rational and controlled. But that rigid control often masks a fear of your own emotional depths. The person having the emotional outburst is simply expressing what you've learned to suppress. They're showing you the part of yourself you've buried under layers of mental conditioning. Here's what I find remarkable about this process. Life seems to have an uncanny ability to place exactly the right people in front of you to show you exactly what you need to see about yourself. It's as if reality is conspiring to give you a complete education in your own unconscious material. That difficult colleague who pushes all your buttons, that family member who knows exactly how to trigger you, that friend whose habits drive you up the wall. They're not obstacles to your peace of mind. They're curriculum. And notice how persistent this curriculum is. You might think you've learned your lesson with one difficult person, only to find someone else showing up with the same basic pattern in a slightly different package. Your controlling boss leaves, and somehow you end up with a controlling romantic partner. You distance yourself from a manipulative friend, and suddenly there's a manipulative neighbor. The faces change, but the mirror keeps reflecting the same hidden material until you finally get the message and do the inner work. This isn't coincidence. This is consciousness trying to become whole, trying to reclaim all the parts of itself that have been split off and projected outward. But we resist this curriculum, don't we? We'd much rather believe that our problems are out there, that our disturbance comes from external sources. It's so much easier to point at someone else and say they're the problem. It requires no self-examination, no difficult inner work, no uncomfortable recognition of our own contradictions and limitations. Yet this very resistance is what keeps us stuck. As long as you believe that your peace depends on other people changing their behavior, you're giving your power away to forces beyond your control. You become a victim of circumstances, always at the mercy of how others choose to show up in the world. I once knew a man who was constantly frustrated with his wife's tendency to worry. He would lecture her about the futility of anxiety, tell her to just stop worrying, become exasperated when she couldn't simply think her way out of her concerns. And the more worried she became, the more frustrated he became, until their entire relationship was caught in this negative feedback loop. One day he had what he called a revelation. He realized that his frustration with her worry was itself a form of worry. He was constantly anxious about her anxiety. He was worrying about her worrying. The very quality he was trying to eliminate in her was playing out in him in a different form. Once he saw this, everything changed. Instead of trying to fix her worry, he began to examine his own. Instead of being frustrated with her anxiety, he became curious about his own need to control her emotional state. This is the shift that changes everything. Instead of asking, why are they like that? You begin asking, why does this bother me so much? Instead of trying to change them, you become interested in what their behavior is revealing about your own inner landscape. Now, I want to be clear about something. This doesn't mean you have to tolerate genuinely harmful or abusive behavior. This isn't about becoming a doormat or ignoring real problems. It's about recognizing that your emotional reaction to other people's behavior is information about you, not just about them. When you're triggered by someone, that trigger is a signal. It's pointing towards something in your unconscious that wants to be seen, understood, integrated. The trigger is actually a gift, though it rarely feels like one in the moment. I remember the first time I really understood this. I was dealing with someone I considered to be incredibly selfish. Everything was always about them. They never seemed to consider how their actions affected others. They were completely self-absorbed, and I was quite frankly disgusted by this behavior. But something made me pause and ask myself an uncomfortable question. Where in my own life was I being selfish? At first, my mind immediately protested. I wasn't selfish. I was considerate, thoughtful, always thinking about others. But I sat with the question longer, and slowly, honestly, the truth began to emerge. Yes, I was selfish, but I was selfish in socially acceptable ways. I was selfish about my time, my energy, my attention. I gave to others, but I gave in ways that made me feel good about myself, that reinforced my self-image as a generous person. I was selfish about maintaining my identity as someone who wasn't selfish. I was even being selfish in my judgment of this other person, using their behavior as a way to feel superior, more evolved, more conscious. What struck me most was how cleverly my ego had disguised its selfishness. I had created an entire persona around being selfless, but this very persona was serving my ego's need to be special, to be better than others. My generosity had become a form of spiritual materialism. I was collecting good deeds like trophies to reinforce my self-image. The person I was judging was being transparently selfish, which somehow felt more honest than my disguised version. At least they weren't pretending to be something they weren't. At least they weren't using their selfishness as evidence of their virtue. Once I saw this, my entire relationship with that person shifted. I didn't suddenly approve of their behavior, but I stopped being emotionally hooked by it. I could see it clearly without being disturbed by it. And interestingly, as I became less reactive to their selfishness, they seemed to become less selfish around me. It's as if my judgment had been feeding the very quality I was trying to resist. This is one of the most profound discoveries you can make about human psychology. The qualities you judge most harshly in others are often the qualities you're most unconscious about in yourself. And your judgment of these qualities actually reinforces them, both in you and in the people around you. When you judge someone for being angry, you're often suppressing your own anger, which only makes it build up pressure beneath the surface. When you criticize someone for being weak, you're usually defending against your own feelings of vulnerability. When you condemn someone for being fake or inauthentic, you're often avoiding looking at the ways you perform or pretend in your own life. But here's the truly fascinating part. Your judgment doesn't just affect you. It actually amplifies the very behavior you're trying to eliminate in others. When you judge someone's anger, you create more tension in the relationship, which often makes them more angry. When you criticize someone's weakness, you make them feel more defensive and vulnerable. Your judgment becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating more of what you don't want to see. It's as if the universe has a sense of humor about this. The harder you push against something, the more it pushes back. The more you resist a particular quality in others, the more it seems to multiply around you. The mirror of relationship is always perfect, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. The people who disturb you the most are often your greatest teachers, though they're teaching you something you'd rather not learn. But here's the beautiful thing about this process. Once you begin to recognize the mirror for what it is, once you start seeing other people as reflections of your own unconscious material, judgment begins to dissolve naturally. How can you judge someone for reflecting back to you what's already inside you? How can you condemn them for showing you what you haven't yet integrated in yourself? This doesn't lead to moral relativism or the abandonment of all standards. It leads to something much more mature: compassion, real compassion. Not the condescending kind that looks down on others, but the kind that recognizes that we're all struggling with the same basic human challenges. We all have the capacity for selfishness and generosity, for wisdom and foolishness, for love and fear. The only difference is which aspects we're conscious of and which aspects remain hidden in our shadows. When you truly understand this, every difficult person becomes a doorway to greater self-knowledge. Every trigger becomes an invitation to wholeness. Every judgment becomes an opportunity to reclaim another piece of your disowned self. I think of it like this. Imagine you're walking through a hall of mirrors, but you don't realize they're mirrors. You think you're seeing different people, different rooms, different realities. You might be frightened by some of the images, attracted to others, puzzled by still others, but eventually you realize that every image is just another angle of yourself. Every reflection is showing you something about who you are. Once you see this, the fear dissolves. How can you be afraid of your own reflection? The attraction and aversion balance out. How can you be obsessed with or repulsed by what's already part of you? What remains is simply curiosity, wonder, and a deep appreciation for the complexity and wholeness of your own being. But this realization doesn't happen all at once. It's more like slowly waking up in a dream. First, you might notice that one of the people in the hall looks suspiciously familiar. Then you begin to see patterns, recognitions, echoes of yourself in every face. Gradually, the illusion of separation begins to dissolve, and you realize you've been having a conversation with yourself all along. This is perhaps why solitude can be so terrifying for some people. When you're alone, there's no one else to project onto, no one else to blame for your discomfort. You're left face to face with yourself, with all your contradictions and complexities, with no external distractions to keep you from seeing the full scope of who you are. This understanding transforms your entire relationship with other people. You stop trying to fix them and start becoming curious about what they're revealing. You stop taking their behavior personally and start seeing it as information. You stop being a victim of their unconsciousness and start being a student of your own. And here's perhaps the most surprising thing of all. When you stop trying to change other people, they often begin to change on their own. Not because you're manipulating them, but because your non-reactive presence gives them space to see themselves more clearly. Your acceptance of their reflection gives them permission to look in the mirror without shame or defensiveness. This is the paradox of transformation. The more you try to change others, the more they resist. But when you simply accept them as they are while working on yourself, they often naturally evolve. It's as if your willingness to own your projections gives them permission to stop carrying those projections for you. I've seen this happen countless times. A woman stops trying to make her husband more emotional and starts exploring her own relationship with vulnerability. Suddenly, he begins opening up more. A man stops criticizing his wife's anxiety and starts examining his own need for control. Miraculously, she begins to relax. It's not magic, it's psychology. When you reclaim your projections, you free others from having to act them out. The outer world will always reflect the inner world. This is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Every person you meet is a facet of the jewel of your own consciousness. Every relationship is an opportunity to know yourself more completely. Every trigger is a call to come home to a part of yourself you've left behind. So the next time someone irritates you, disturbs you, or pushes your buttons, remember this: they're not doing something to you. They're revealing something about you, and that revelation, however uncomfortable, is precisely what you need to see to become more whole, more integrated, more genuinely yourself. But don't expect this process to be easy or comfortable. The ego doesn't give up its projections willingly. It has invested enormous energy in maintaining the illusion that your problems come from outside. It will fight to preserve this illusion, because without it, you would have to take full responsibility for your inner states. Start small. The next time you feel mildly annoyed by someone's behavior, pause and ask yourself, what quality am I seeing in them that I haven't fully owned in myself? Don't try to fix yourself or them. Just notice. Just be curious. The awareness itself is transformative. As you develop this capacity for self-reflection, you'll begin to notice something remarkable. Your relationships will start to feel less like battlegrounds and more like classrooms. People will still behave in ways that challenge you, but instead of feeling victimized by their behavior, you'll feel grateful for the insight it provides. The mirror of relationship is always telling the truth. The question is whether you're ready to see what it's reflecting.